Hello, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Georgia, and today we are talking about all of the books I read last year, and I'm going to rank them kind of more into general categories than against one another, because that seems like a lot. But hopefully this is helpful if you are looking for some reading inspiration for 2025 and just generally want to know what resonated with me if you think we have similar reading tastes. Last year I ended up reading around 30-ish books. A few less than other years. When I've filmed these before, it's normally in the 50s, and that's okay. Clearly I just felt like reading less last year. I also remember a distinct moment when I just became completely frustrated with my Kindle. I just couldn't read a single book on my Kindle, and it probably like a month or two passed without me reading before I remembered that yes, you can pick up the written word in book form again. Once you go Kindle, you can go back. So then I started buying books, and that changed my reading patterns a lot. We've got lots of books to get through, and I've kind of categorized them from books that I kind of preferred less or least through to my favorites, and I absolutely recommend them to everyone. Let's start with the books that for me were a bit of a pass. They didn't totally hit the mark. The first is Do Purpose. So these are those do books. They're really short, bite-sized bits of information. And to be honest, this was a pass for me because it did feel very much style over substance. I don't think I got a whole lot out of it. And if I'm spending money on books, I do want some substance. So I guess if you like bite-sized information, this book might be for you. But for me, I don't think it really delivered on its promise of offering insights on how to create, build, and sustain a purpose-driven company. So it was a pass from me. The next book, I was really looking forward to reading this. It's Ambition Monster. I absolutely love anti-capitalist, anti-corporate ladder rhetoric, novels, memoirs, whatever it might be. But this was a hard pass for me because there was so much detail, and yet I still don't know who this person is. While I really appreciate the rhetoric of, not always climbing the corporate ladder, that ambition is not always, for the best, either mentally, spiritually, physically, whatever it might be, I don't think it scratched my itch on this book. So that was a pass from me. So I sped read OK Days. It's about two 20-somethings in London living their life, and obviously that as a premise resonates very much with me, but I literally cannot remember what happened in this book, what even a character's name was. So I feel like that is why it lands into the pass list for me, because it just wasn't very memorable and didn't have much of an impact on me. Okay, I was not a fan of Green Dot. I read this one, really looking forward to it because I love an Aussie novel, but the main character was far too privileged. It was very hard to digest. And whilst I think what I appreciated was learning about, or getting an insight into falling in love with someone who is already married, and I appreciated that perspective, but otherwise it was just really hard to read from the perspective of this far too privileged main character, and just the struggle was not real. So that's a pass for me. I am a huge Jodi Picoult fan. I've probably mentioned that in all the other reading videos, but her latest work this year that came out, By Any Other Name, this was so difficult to get through. I absolutely struggled reading this. I almost didn't even finish, but out of respect for Jodi, I wanted to see if maybe there was some kind of incredible ending, which there wasn't. So this one is a big pass for me. I did learn a lot about Elizabethan England and Shakespeare, but that's not enough for me. That's a pass. My final two passes are by the same author, which I feel really bad about, but I do love her other books, and hit rate is pretty strong still. But my pass for Then She Was Gone is just because I can't with this book. It just relied on so many old tropes of girl in basement and it was so obvious what was going on, which for a thriller I do not want. I want to be surprised. I want to be page turning, wondering what's going on. So this one I definitely can't. And then also The House We Grew Up In. This just like was a long story about a hoarder. I didn't appreciate the different perspectives of the characters. This was just a dysfunctional family and like very surface level. So once again, those two not big fans of. The next few books, I'm kind of neither here nor there about. I don't regret reading them, but I'm not kind of shouting out to the world saying that you should read these, that they're must reads. And I do think books are so personal. It's completely like dependent on where you are in your life and what's really resonating with you. So yeah, choose if you will. So I love Emma Gennon's Substack, and yeah, I wanted to support her with this recent release of hers, A Year of Nothing. But yeah, I don't know, I don't think it constitutes a book, which is what I thought I was buying. It's more like a short story, which was sweet and all, but it wasn't really transformative or anything beyond that. It's just kind of monthly journal entries of her year while she was recovering from burnout. Yeah, it's a good reminder to take it slow, but ultimately, yeah, there wasn't like a huge hook in here for me. The next book I listened to, I'm a big fan of the Shameless podcast, so I listened to 4am, which is their book about, I guess, stories or questions that keep us up at night, up at 4am. So listening to that in audio format was perfect because obviously I usually listen to their content via audio with podcasts, and for that reason I really enjoyed it. But yeah, I don't need to like rush back to listen to it again. I followed 4am up with another audiobook. I listened to Notes on Heartbreak, which was really sweet. It was about the author's experience of ending a relationship, and yeah, I really appreciated how raw and honest it was, and obviously being narrated by the author as well was quite like, yeah, heart-wrenching. But yeah, beyond that, it wasn't super sticky. I don't think anything about it really like stuck with me. It was just a nice listen. So as a big fan of Miranda July's All Fours, I was really excited to follow that book up with one of her first novels. So I picked up The First Bad Man. I think I found it hard to follow along, and I found it hard to accept like how the protagonist was treated. It's about a 40-something woman working at a non-profit, and she's like pining over this board member, but she also has to take in her boss's really rude daughter, and then other things happen. So I wanted to love this book because I really loved All Fours, but yeah, I think ultimately how absurd it was made it hard to progress through this, and actually I was kind of excited to finish it and be done with it. So yeah, it's not like a hard recommend, it's more just like a eh. So Cold Enough for Snow was a very sweet read, but it was very slow and I struggled to get through it. I really appreciated the exploration of the mother-daughter dynamic and their relationship. It's like quite literally about a mother and daughter meeting from abroad in Tokyo, and I guess them and their conversations and coming to terms with like their relationship and what they will and won't talk about. And so I really thought it was quite beautiful and melancholy, but at the same time I wasn't really drawn to it and it wasn't resonating too much with me. So ultimately it's a bit like a read it if you want, but also like not gonna recommend it. So yeah, that's the end of, I guess, the books on like the lesser scale of my ranking. Once again, I want to preface that books are very personal, and so no shade to those books. But the next few books are on my like list. So these books are the ones that I really enjoyed. The first one is The Modern. I really like the cover of this, and also the premise just like sounds like it's gonna slap. It's about an Australian woman moving to New York City to work at MoMA. It's the storyline that like 100% draws me in. I enjoyed this book as the character she grapples with themes of of marriage and her identity, her queerness, being in a hetero relationship whilst also being queer and like obviously I guess straight facing to the world, and what that kind of does to her internally, which I thought was like a really beautiful through line. And then in addition to that, it's also about career uncertainties, working in the art world, a lot of, I guess, notes on art history throughout the book as well. So if you're into all of those themes, then you'll probably like this book. The next book I read, I was really looking forward to because I was a huge fan of Cleopatra and Frankenstein. So obviously this was her follow-up book, Blue Sisters. I don't think I loved this as much as Cleopatra and Frankenstein, which is why it's on my like versus love list. But also, you know, it was a good beachside read. I took this to Ischia with me. I read it over a few days. I enjoyed being in the world of these three sisters as they navigate grief with their fourth sister having passed away. And I enjoyed all of their unique personalities and their family dynamics. But ultimately, you know, I read it, I liked it, and then I moved on. So yeah, probably if you like themes of grief, family dynamics, and addiction, yeah, you'll probably like this book. The next one I read on my Kindle, that was The Villa, which was a fun read. It's about two groups of people who come to this villa, but they're set in different timelines. So one group is in the 70s and one group is in present day. And the present day group, one of the characters uncovers a crime that took place when the 70s group were there. I feel like I'm confusing myself with that storyline. But yes, this was meant to be a thriller, and I do think that true crime element was there, but actually it was the dynamic and the relationship of the present day characters. So essentially like the two present day characters, they're very competitive with one another, and I found that more interesting and intriguing. So yeah, no regrets reading this. I was taken on a journey, but it's not a must read either. I learned a lot about the history and institution of marriage by reading I Don't. There is so much research that goes into this book, which Ford does note in the beginning is very US, like middle class and very white centric research. So do keep that in mind if you're going in reading it. But beyond that, I think there's just a lot to learn about, yeah, why we have marriage, what its role is, changing your last name, like things like that I think are just like important to kind of read and take in and then let inform your decisions. So I really appreciated that read, and I thought, you know, it was quite powerful because, you know, knowledge is power. So maybe you want to pick that up and learn about it. I think it's, yeah, just good to know. Next up is Bunny. So this is a novel about an MFA student who is drawn into the bizarre world of a clique of women in her course, which she refers to, or maybe they refer to themselves as the Bunnies. It really does blur the line between reality and imagination. Next up is Evenings and Weekends. This was a really beautiful read. It's about a few different characters who went to high school together, but now they are living in London in their 30s. But it also kind of tracks, I guess, the consequences or how the events from their teenage years together are unfolding in their 30s today in London. So I thought it was a really beautiful read and lots of themes of relationships and sexuality and identity. So yeah, a really nice read. Next up is Wintering. I just read this book recently. I always, I think around winter time, try to read a book that helps me get into the right headspace for winter because it's real here. It gets dark, it gets cold, it gets lonely. Whilst I wasn't a fan of the author's voice, I think she has a lot of privilege and resources at her disposal. I do think there are elements from this book that we can take to help adapt our mindset towards winter. So instead of it being this thing that for 3 months takes away from our life, we can actually lean into it and enjoy the wintering process, that we are allowed to cocoon and hibernate like a bear. That, you know, the same way plants will have seasons to grow, they'll have seasons to root as well, to like rest and recover. Next up is The Wrong Sister. I really enjoyed this. I love a thriller. There are a few different storylines going on. It's about two sisters. They swap houses for a weekend, and then one of them unexpectedly is attacked, and her husband dies. And then obviously you follow to find out why. What happened? Was it the wrong sister? Was it the right sister? You'll find out if you read it. But ultimately, I thought this was a page turner and I was intrigued. Next up, we have I Didn't Do the Thing Today. Beautiful book cover. Also lovely words inside. I really enjoyed this book. I think it is a fantastic read. I would just read like a chapter after work each night, and it would remind you that you don't need to be productive every day of every minute, and that you can just let it go and not do the thing today, that you can enjoy your hobbies for fun and not have to monetize them, even though that is literally what I am doing right now. And you can also just put off doing whatever you were going to do and life will move on. So I think it's just a nice stark reminder in a world where, like, you know, productivity is admired and respected, to not do the thing today. And finally on this list is Vladimir. This is a book I really enjoyed. I loved this author's writing style. I think I'll definitely be looking for more books that she's written, if she has written any others. In fact, maybe this is her debut. Essentially, it's about a 50-something-year-old professor, and she is interested in her new colleague Vladimir, who's a bit younger. Ultimately, the book is about the woman, the professor, and her experience of aging, what she wants to do with her relationships and her marriage, and like what kind of stance she's going to take amongst it all. So I really enjoyed this book, and you might too. So this next category are all the books I loved. Within this category, there might be like a B team and an A team. Like there's the books I loved, and then there's the books I really loved. So I'll make that obvious as I get through them. But also I felt like I couldn't put them in the liked category anymore, but they weren't like the creme de la creme. So first up in that category of, I guess, the B team love is Chrysalis. Chrysalis captures the journey of a woman named Victoria, and she undergoes a really transformative experience in the wake of a trauma. But why it's really interesting is that it's never from Victoria's perspective. We only ever get to see how Victoria transforms herself and her like journey of self-exploration through the lens of people around her. So I think that is really interesting just straight away, in terms of we're watching the story and completely focused on this protagonist who is changing and transforming, but it's never from her perspective. I found it like a really interesting, I guess, look into self-evolution and like kind of the potentially selfish ramifications of when like society takes this idea of self-care too far. In 2024, I read the Outline trilogy, which I absolutely adored. I definitely haven't written a novel, but I also haven't read a novel, which has really surprised me in its approach for quite some time. So I really appreciated that. I thought the author was so rich in her observations of the human experience, which is so interesting, and I appreciated that each chapter we get like a little sneak peek into the various characters or people that the protagonist interacts with, and I think all of that was just so beautiful, and I was completely engrossed in them. It did get a bit repetitive towards the end, but maybe also I should have taken bigger breaks between reading them. So yeah, that's the Outline trilogy, which I really loved. Next up is All That's Left Unsaid, which was such a beautiful book. This is about an Australian Vietnamese woman who is searching for, I guess, the truth of how her brother died, or was murdered, I should say. I think the premise makes it seem like it's going to be a thriller, like a whodunit, who killed her brother, but it is not that. So don't go in thinking it's a thriller, because then I think you'll be disappointed. Instead, you'll get such a better story than a thriller. It's so rich with the complexities of intergenerational trauma, immigration, assimilation, racism, all the isms. It is just completely like capturing this very real experience for so many people assimilating to Australian culture in the 90s. And because of the structure, you get all these different perspectives across different ages. And I just thought it was so beautiful, and I was completely hooked on it. I loved this book. The final book in my I love pile is No One Saw a Thing. I just read this recently. Liam's reading it at the moment. It's set in London. It's a thriller about two children getting on the tube ahead of their mother. The mum doesn't make it on the tube, but then on the next stop, only one child gets off. So yeah, multiple witnesses haven't seen a thing. There's just a whole heap of secrets and lies that get unfolded, and it's all in search for the child. And I was completely captivated. It was a total page turner. I think I read this in like 2 sittings because I just absolutely had to know what was going on. And as well, it's set in London, so having that backdrop of areas I'm familiar with was also adding to the joy of it all. Okay, so now we're up to like the creme de la creme of my books I loved. These are like probably my top 5 before I get into my number 1. So in the top 5, I have Wandering Souls. This book was heart-wrenching but incredibly beautiful. It's a story about a Vietnamese family who are separated by war. 3 siblings have to leave their war-torn country. They navigate loss, trauma, displacement, and belonging. I think it was just such a beautiful read, and I learned so much from it. The author had me completely bought into their story. I felt like I was on this journey with them, and I just can't say that about a lot of books. So this is a highly recommended book from me. I really recommend it to everyone. I absolutely loved it. Free Food for Millionaires. This book follows Casey, who is a young Korean American woman. She's navigating cultural identity, family expectations, and I guess ambition, in contrast to the big old New York City and what is considered success and fulfillment. This book I absolutely adored. I put it off reading it for so long because of how chunky of a book it is. And that was very silly because I found myself reaching to read this so often. This was a definite book where when I closed it, I was really sad to say goodbye to the characters. I really enjoyed being part of their lives, and they felt so real to me. Next up is All Fours, which I loved. The Guardian had an article titled "The Women Who Read Miranda July's All Fours Then Blew Up Their Lives," and I feel like that captures the book. It is pretty accurate. This book is about a semi-famous artist who goes on a road trip, but her road trip gets completely derailed when she finds herself in just the next town over. She's kind of fallen in love with this man, and she's redoing a motel room so she can stay near him, and she's completely enchanted by him, and I am completely enchanted by her. The whole story is so interesting, so intriguing, also so bizarre, so weird, and I'm all here for it. I really was, a huge fan of All Fours, if you can't tell. Okay, next up is Ordinary Human Failings, and I completely devoured this book. I think I read it in 1, maybe 2 sittings because I was just so engrossed in the story and I didn't want to do anything else. The story explores an Irish family who are forced to, I guess, confront their moral struggles or their human flaws because the 10-year-old child in this family is suspected of a really violent crime. And in it, you get to learn about all the different members of the family and all of their various experiences or decisions that have led to this moment in which you are reading this book. And yeah, ultimately, it'll be just a lesson in empathy and in the fact that we make hundreds of human decisions, choices, experiences over a lifetime, and we are very likely going to make ordinary human failings. And then I'm going to throw a rogue nonfiction book into some of my top books of the year. This book, Stop Being Reasonable, is very Malcolm Gladwell-esque. It covers, I guess, a few true stories that kind of show the limit of our human desire for reason, that like we don't always make decisions by being reasonable. In each chapter, the philosopher Eleanor Gordon Smith recounts a very true story of various people who kind of, I guess, show the limit of our human reason, that we are not as rational as we like to think. I really enjoyed reading a chapter before bed each night because it was just like a little short story of that person's experience. I think there's about 6 or 7 chapters as well, so you can get through it in a week. And finally, my number one read of 2024 is a book called Stillborn. I absolutely adored this book. This book won't be for everyone, so trigger warning that it does deal with themes of grief and miscarriage. If you are in a place to read it, you will get a beautiful story about the complexities of motherhood and choice, and ultimately, I guess, identity. And you get that story through 2 different women's lives. Their stories are intertwined as they're such long friends of one another, but they have very different stories. So one knows she doesn't want to be a mother. She's very sure about this. There's things that come up in her life where she gets to experience unconventional ways of motherhood. And then the other story is about a woman who very much wants to birth her own child, and whilst she is pregnant, she learns that her child may be born with an illness that means they might die as soon as they're born. And obviously there's a lot of difficulty and grief and trauma associated with that storyline. So I think having them intertwine in each other's lives as like such stark contrasting different stories is so beautiful, and I was completely engrossed in the story. I thought it was just like one of the most beautiful reads I've read in a while, and it just makes you think long and hard. And so yes, I really recommend this one. It's my number one read. I'm so grateful to my friend who recommended it to me, so I highly recommend, if you can add it to your list, that it is worth the read. Okay, so those are all the books I read last year, and what a year of reading it was. And yeah, I'm such a fan of books. I think they are the cheapest and most enjoyable education out there. The fact that you can get so many new perspectives and insights into people and yourself whilst also being taken on a journey or a story is just incredible. So hopefully you got some recommendations, and if you have any recommendations for myself, please leave them in the comments. I am absolutely always adding them to my list. I hope you have a lovely day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye!